It's time to go beyond the headlines, cause I don't put in overtime just so I can headline. Okay, now it's Fox Sports, I'm live with Renee. Going hard every day, sports rapping every play. Different segments for your favorites, coming at you daily with positive vibes, yeah, we some game changers. Basketball, football, soccer, with different interviews, you never know who may pop up. Listen, only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines. Only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines. Only on Beyond the Headlines, this is Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington.
Welcome back to Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington out of Oklahoma. Joining us to get into the NBA, specifically the Thunder and so much more, we've got Jon Hamm on the show, the NBA insider with 107.7 The Franchise and a co-host on the OKC Dream Team. Welcome to the show.
Well, thanks for having me this morning.
I am excited. It's perfect timing when we scheduled this way back when that we had a great week around Oklahoma City. Aside from the loss to the Lakers, which we'll get into as well, but yeah. It was their Thursday night win over the Rockets. We saw Russell Westbrook return and a great tribute video to him. I mean, talk us through that video and kind of, what the feeling was in Oklahoma with his return.
Yeah, so, if you've been living under a rock, let's be honest. Whenever former Thunder players and even coaches, Scott Brooks, for example, when they return to Oklahoma City, they haven't done a tribute video. It's been kind of a quasi policy that they've had not to do that. Now, they have brought attention, welcome back Scott Brooks, welcome back Serge Ibaka. And, there's always been a warm reception, really, except for two guys. One, Reggie Jackson, who he was like so happy to get out of OKC, and a lot of it had to do with he just wanted to be a starting point guard in the league. But the way that he left, tweeting out tears of joy, and just he left OKC in not the greatest place. And then of course Kevin Durant, which there's a whole slew of reasons there. So fast forward, Russell Westbrook is making his return. There is a tribute video. So, of course, they go through the start of the game with the national anthem and all the standard things. Then they go to introduce the Rockets starting lineup. And that's when they start to show the tribute video. And it was a very excellent encapsulation of Russ in about 2 minutes. It caught, some of his dynamics on the floor. It shows some of his interactions with Durant, Nick Collison, Paul George, got a few of his reactions when he's talking to the media. Those were kind of slipped in as well. Showed his work in the community. It was special, and they introduced him first, and he got a very loud ovation. And it was pretty cool. And then the Thunder fans, once that was done and the game started, they resumed, cheering for Oklahoma City, not Russell Westbrook. So I thought all around it was handled just very well.
Yeah, and something that has been brought up a lot, as you mentioned, he is the first person that had this video created for him and really was honored in a special way. A lot of people had around, the sports world were getting on the fact that there was nothing done for James Harden. But my argument was when James Harden left OKC, he was not the James Harden that we know today. He was a sixth man for the Thunder. He wasn't, one of the top players in the league at the time. But did you have any thoughts on the fact that, or did you even think about the fact that there was nothing created for James Harden, or was that completely out of your mind as well?
Yeah, and frankly, I think that's because back in 2012 when James was traded to Houston, we weren't doing tribute videos. Now it seems like NBA teams do them with welcome back former two-way player, whoever the guy is, right? They seem to, like the Lakers, for example, did a tribute video for the guys they traded for Anthony Davis, and I don't know how much of a lasting bond was there really created there, right? So they should be for very special occasions. When Isaiah Thomas goes back to the Boston Celtics, there should be a tribute video because what he did during his time there was obviously very emotional and very impactful. So the same thing here. I think we got a little out of hand with these tribute videos. And so back in 2012, that wasn't a thing back then. So, and then of course you fast forward to Kevin, and it was just a totally different circumstance where that would not have went over well in the arena.
No, you can't quite honor Kevin Durant when he returns from leaving your team to go to the team that beat you in the playoffs when you were up 3-1. That's not going to sit well at all.
Yeah,
And even the way that it went about and other reasons as well. But no, you bring up a good point. We saw tribute videos this year specifically, the Lakers, because they had so many guys that went to the Pelicans. I think it made sense to have a tribute video. Kawhi Leonard, enough said. No need to even explain why that was needed. Russell Westbrook. But we can't get into this participation trophy mindset that every single player that ever leaves a team needs to have a tribute video when they come back. You can welcome them back with the PA. That's it. That's enough.
Yeah.
Yeah. But
and that's the thing, that they've always just done the, welcome back whoever the player is, and they get their moment. And again, I think it's an honor that should be reserved and kept just for those, very unique circumstances.
Yes, without a doubt. And Westbrook did go on to have a great game, 34 points, but what was even more special about that game was the fact that this was between the tribute video and the Thunder handedly beating the Rockets. I feel like a lot of people have been sleeping on them. Once Russell Westbrook left, everybody kind of assumed that they would just be a mediocre team, but they haven't been. If you look at their season so far, Chris Paul is no slouch. You can't overlook what he brings to a team. Plus, you still have players like Steven Adams and Dennis Schroeder and Gilgeous-Alexander and Gallinari. So you can't just completely underestimate them. And I think this was a game that really put them on the map a little bit more and got more people. I know people were even like, whoa, wait a minute, the Thunder. I was like, you can't sleep on the Thunder. What have you been seeing from them all season as a team that might be completely under the radar and overlooked, especially being in such a stacked Western Conference?
Yeah, and you're right. When Paul George was traded and Russell Westbrook, a couple of weeks later, there was a whole lot of, people immediately assumed, oh, this team is tanking, right? Mm-hmm. But when you have Chris Paul on your team, you don't tank. I mean, he is still a very good NBA player. Quite frankly, he's probably going to make an All-Star team this year. So, I think where people were just uncertain was like, how long is this team going to be held together? Obviously Danilo Gallinari is in the last year of his contract. He should be in demand around the league. At 31 years old, he probably doesn't make sense as a long-term piece on a Thunder team that is going to rebuild. Steven Adams is also, I think, a guy that, yes, his salary is a little bit up there, but a lot of teams would probably like to add him as well. And you mentioned Schroeder. He's a guy that's on a very good contract. He's got 1 year after this at about $15.5 million. Has excelled as a sixth man, but has been a starting point guard before and would probably like to be that again. So I think there was a lot of uncertainty, like on paper, this team is probably going to be competitive. I think that was sort of the assumption, but I think it was a Barry Trammell who writes for the Oklahoman. His guess was, I think they'll win like 38 games, but subtract one game for every month Chris Paul is not on the roster, right? If he's traded in February, then 37. If he's traded in January, take him, like that was sort of the math that was going through our heads at the time. So then the team gets off to a 5-10 start. It was a difficult start to the season. They're still trying to figure things out because it's a lot of guys that are kind of slapped together, some veterans and young guys trying to figure things out. But, once they kind of found their groove, it's a team that does a very good job of moving the basketball, which they kind of have to do. They don't have that star player that can just dominate the game. A lot of guys get involved, and they take smart shots. They take very efficient shots. They wait. They're patient. They don't get out on the fast break like Thunder teams of the past used to do. They're very efficient in the half court and in crunch time or clutch time, however you want to call it. They're very good there. So, and then defensively, they've got a lot of guys as well that have, they're very skilled and they can scheme and really make it difficult for opposing scorers. It's a very long-winded explanation, but yeah, they have surprised some people locally, nationally, and if this team stays together, it looks like a team that is, probably certainly going to make the playoffs, and it's probably going to give someone some heartburn in the first round.
Yeah, and if you look at the fact that over the last few weeks, the wins that they've picked up, they beat the Raptors, they beat the Mavs, they beat the Spurs, they had a close loss to the Sixers. Thursday, they beat the Rockets. But then they turned around. This was what was very surprising to me because here I was like, and not that one game changes things by any means. It's a very long season. I'm not saying at all that this completely changes the future and the postseason predictions for OKC. But then they turned around and lost to the Lakers without LeBron and AD. It was Kyle Kuzma, Rajon Rondo that were leading the way. That was actually very surprising to me. I really, was thrown. Once I saw they weren't playing, I was like, oh, the Lakers are going to, it'll be a competitive game, but they'll lose. And then they actually ended up beating them. And it was a very strong performance by Kuzma with 36, and Rondo had a double-double. But do you think it's just the ups and downs of the season in my opinion?
Yeah, I think that's largely it. And plus, the Lakers were on the second night of a back-to-back. They played in Dallas the night before. And so, Billy Donovan kind of alluded to this, and I think it makes sense. Sometimes the emotion of the previous game can carry over. And I remember when Kevin made his return, and the Warriors played the Thunder, and it was just an emotional, visceral night. I remember, I think the next game, the Warriors got blew out. They were just, drained. And I think the Thunder kind of stunk up their next game, too. So I think there might have been a little bit of just emotional hangover from that previous game. But then, that is like saying it's all the Thunder's fault. The Lakers came out and they just shot the ball incredibly well. And there's some of those nights where even if the Lakers were shooting just well, not incredibly well, they probably still win the game. But when you factor in that just about everything they threw up seemed to be going in the basket, it's one of those nights in the NBA you just chalk it up and move on. The thing I'll say about OKC is they have not had very many nights like that this season.
Yeah, I think that's exactly it. It was very uncharacteristic of what we've been seeing from them so far this season. And it happens. Off nights are going to happen. But something that, even as we talk about the Lakers being without LeBron and without AD, something that has been throughout the season, and is every season, but it seems like this year we're hearing a lot of really big name players, injuries. We saw Steph Curry get injured. He had surgery on his left hand. We saw Kyrie Irving get injured early in the season. He's still trying to work back. As of recent, AD had a scary fall in the Lakers game last Tuesday. It would have ended up being, by the time the show records, that ended up, they were saying it's just a bruise. It should only be a couple games that he's out. But it was the way that it looks. We're just hoping it's nothing more serious. And then Joel Embiid gets a nasty, nasty dislocated finger. He needs surgery. Injuries. As we get into the All-Star break, which is about the midway point of the regular season, how much will these injuries help a team like OKC or some of these teams that are on the outside looking to get in, pick up some much needed wins to be able to get into the playoffs? What's your takeaway on the way the injuries will impact? And of course, we don't know who will get injured, who will come back. We're not that smart. We can't see into the future.
Right. But also,
go ahead.
I'm sorry, I was going to say, also add in that, I know one of the hot topics is, load management or resting players. Well, the guys that are getting that treatment are guys that are nursing an injury. Like Kawhi Leonard has a degenerative condition that they are trying to, I'm sure they probably could play him for 82 games and play him like normal, but then what kind of an impact is that going to have on the long term of his career? Russell Westbrook has finally sort of bought in to that concept with the Rockets. For years, we kept saying, man, Russ needs to take off the second night of a back-to-back and just sort of save himself. He has a knee condition that is going to be there as long as he plays, and it's going to be there the rest of his life. So, that's another angle, too. And when you have a team, like, for example, a Memphis, that is a lot of scrappy young guys that they can sneak up and surprise a team on a certain night like that when they've got a guy out with a legitimately just got injured, or they're trying to manage an existing injury. Yeah, that's sort of what you see throughout the course of the season as teams try to manage that. And, it's the reality of today's NBA. Where, frankly, teams are just trying to get themselves in the best possible position for playoff time. That's kind of what they're aiming for in the regular season. Is not that it doesn't matter, but they're not really just going all out anymore like I think some of these guys used to. It's just the reality of the world these days.
Yeah, and so that leads me to my next question, because we have been hearing from Adam Silver in the NBA that they're proposing possible changes in the future, such as changing the amount of games in the regular season to making it a shorter regular season, adding in some mini tournaments, making a play-in round for the playoffs for those seeds that are just on the cusp of being in the top 8. So that being said, looking at this season and past seasons where we have had players, either get injured or load management and they're not able to play as many games because of the fact that it's just so much travel and wear on their bodies, with the fact that they can go in a week and play 4 or 5 games, it's
Right.
easily. So how much do we really need to take into consideration these proposed changes, and what are your thoughts on them as we see that these guys aren't able to play at their best and have to, in a way, save themselves for the playoffs?
Yeah, it's I know that they're trying to come up with a way without slashing the schedule, by like 20%. And that's the thing. When I do see people that step up and say, the NBA season doesn't need to be more than 62 games or 66 games. All right, cool. How are they going to make up that income that is lost and grow it from there? And that's what I think. That's what Adam Silver is trying to figure out. Inject some interest into the regular season. I still don't completely wrap my brain around the midseason tournament idea.
Yeah.
While I completely understand that I might get it in a few years, right? Once it's put into play. But I think it's another, again, something to generate interest in the regular season, another opportunity to get a major sponsor to put their name on a tournament and a trophy that gets handed out that injects some more income into the league. Like there's some financial benefits to that too. So I don't quite get it, but I'm not going to completely trash it either. And I like the idea of having sort of a play-in for the last playoff spot or two. I don't know, I haven't seen exactly how they plan to do that. I don't know if it is going to be like a neutral site tournament, or if they're going to just add a couple of games at the end of the season. But I think that is interesting, and it goes back to a few years ago where Minnesota and Denver played the last game of the regular season. Winner gets in the playoffs. The other team does not. There was another season where OKC was, the last game of the regular season. If they win, they get in, but they also needed, I think, San Antonio to win, and they did not. So they got, so if you can inject some of that interest there towards the end of the season and keep a few teams interested, I think it's worth having a look at.
Yeah, and you know what? As you mentioned that, it got me thinking even more. I mean, we do see that in other leagues. With the NFL and the Wildcard Round, we see that. In the NCAA March Madness, we see those bottom teams that are 64 to 68 have to play in the first round, and that does add to the postseason and make it more exciting for those teams that maybe every year are just missing being in that top 8. I guess my question for that would always just be, how would you go about that? As you mentioned, is it one game? Is it a series? Is it a shortened series, maybe best of 3 instead of best of 7? Because then I guess the rest of the teams are on a bye, essentially. So how long do you have that series go without it, keeping the other teams out for a whole, 7-game series or whatever it may be? I don't know. There's a lot of details that definitely need to be ironed out to make sense of. I like the playoff idea, and I like shortening the season. I agree with you. I think the tournament is a little, it won't make sense until we see it,
Right. No, and that's the thing. And what I keep coming back to is, and I think the NBA understands, it's going to take a while for the players to really care about it, to say, okay, that's something I want to win. In the meantime, it's just, it's just going to be kind of like, okay, well, we got to do this, and woohoo, we won the thing. We get to hang a little trinket somewhere. I think it's going to take some time for that to build up and become a thing, because the NBA title is always going to be the thing that teams and players want to win. But and that's why I hesitate to just completely scoff at this idea. I think if you put it in place, you build it over 5 to 10 years, then let's see, do we have players that are like, well, yeah, I want to win both of these things, and then does that really kind of inject the life that I think the NBA is looking for?
Yeah, because essentially it could have the same meaning and value as the All-Star break. Look how long it took them to figure out how to make the All-Star game more competitive. When you add in whoever wins, now you're donating to charity. You add in more of a benefit from winning and make more value around it, instead of it just being like a pickup game where nobody's playing any defense. Essentially, that's what that's where they would have to figure out for the tournament. How can we make this more competitive?
Yeah.
So that being said, as we get into and near the All-Star break, you see with all the injuries we have, also the emerging of the next generation, the passing of the torch by different players being out this season, whether it's KD, who's going to be out for a while, and Klay Thompson, or even guys getting injured throughout the season. We're seeing that next generation, that 25 and under group, the John Morants and players, Trae Youngs, Luka Doncic, those players that are emerging. What's your take on the next generation in terms of any players that have surprised you with the way that they're playing this season, that maybe they're playing better than you thought, or even worse than you anticipated in that next generation as they really step up to show what they can do in the league?
Yeah, and it is so tricky to, just completely declare something, about a player like early in his career.
Oh,
because,
of course.
And I see this so much where, and I hate to use twitter.com as like my benchmark for that, but, if a 19-year-old has a few off nights and he's a bust, right? And there
yes.
can be this, tendency to completely overreact to things. But no, I'll tell you, I think kind of the next wave of guys that we're seeing coming in, it reminds me a little bit of like 2003 when you had LeBron and Wade and Melo and company come into the league and start to come up. And, Luka is a guy, he's a generational talent. And I always thought he was going to be really good. I didn't think he was going to be like in an MVP conversation at 20 years old. So from that aspect, that's surprising to me. And, you go back and look at that draft. Jaren Jackson Jr. is playing very well. You mentioned with John Morant in Memphis. That is a team. You add in Brandon Clark into that mix as well. That's a team that is set up to be probably pretty impressive in another year or two. Trae Young in Atlanta, it's interesting. Obviously, I saw him at OU, and he was known, he got all the highlights because of the deep three-pointers that he shot. But, his passing ability wasn't talked about nearly enough. And I always thought that was something that was going to translate. My questions were, can he get separation on those three-point shots in the NBA? Can he turn the corner on guys? That first summer league he went to, it was rough. It did not look good. But again, it's something that he kept working at. And I'm a little surprised that he is at this point in year two. So I think that is kind of a surprise for me as well. And, and then look, I'm going to talk about Shai Gilgeous-Alexander for the people out there that, haven't been paying close attention because frankly, OKC has not been on national TV except for one time. I didn't quite expect to see what we're seeing from him this season. And here's a guy that has shown that he can score in a variety of ways. He's very crafty around the basket. He's unleashed a step back three-pointer from time to time that make you go, if he keeps working on that, he's going to develop just a complete arsenal. He's not a guy that just, blows by guys, but occasionally he gets like this burst of speed. It's almost like a video game power-up out of nowhere that he gets a quick burst, gets by his guy, gets to the basket. And once he kind of figures out also how to create contact and maintain contact and get the bucket, get to the free throw line, 7-8 times a game. This is a guy that, is probably not getting a lot of pub because he's not particularly flashy, but he is really impressive.
Yeah, and you know what? You mentioned, I love what you prefaced it with, the fact that we can't write these guys off. They are still so young. And
right.
It's always interesting to me when we have, everyone, we always love to get into these deep conversations and predictions and comparing players. And as they're 18, 19 years old coming out of college, we want to predict they're going to be, whether you're Zion Williamson, you're going to be the best player, one of the best players to ever play in the NBA, or guys that are, John Morant, and they want to say, oh, I don't know, he's a little undersized. Maybe the NCAA tournament run was luck or whatever else. And we aren't sure how they're going to translate to the game and how they're going to rise to the occasion. So it's always interesting and very intriguing to me to see how do they adjust to that next level. Who comes in and is an underdog that now blows up like someone like Luka, as you mentioned, who is already in the conversation for being MVP. And then because we know in the past we've had players like Kevin Durant, Kawhi Leonard, who they're still playing, they're still progressing to play their best basketball now. They're still not done. Of course, KD, we don't know how he'll come back from injury, but coming into the league versus 5 years, 6 years down the line, Anthony Davis, Klay Thompson before he got injured. you see these players that are still growing, and they're going to continue to grow. So we got to give the younger guys a chance to do that as well.
We
But
do, and one thing I talked about on my I had a radio show yesterday morning, which I have every Saturday with some other people. But we were talking about Michael Jordan. He was not Michael Jordan until like year 7 in the league, right? And that was after 3 years of college too. And so I don't know that today's world would have been patient enough with him like kind of they were back then, right? It's almost like he's supposed to be the next chosen one. It's year 3. He hasn't made it past the first round yet. He's a bust, and just sort of slap a label on him. So, you kind of have to go back and look at some other guys and realize that, these things take time. These guys don't hit their prime until they're like 27, 28 years old.
Oh, without a doubt. And that's the thing. I know even in Philly, since I go to the Sixers games and things, you see that around what was Markelle Fultz. You saw it with Ben Simmons. We see it with Joel Embiid. Everyone is quick to just write people off, and it's a shame. You have to give them time to grow. And as you mentioned with Michael Jordan, I also feel like on the other hand, once players have reached that pinnacle, we're quick to just forget where they started and forget the ups and downs and the mistakes. All we remember is Michael Jordan winning championships. We don't remember the Michael Jordan that came into the league, as you mentioned. So that's a really great point. So,
got beat up by the Detroit Pistons for a few years and had to overcome that. Yeah,
it took time. It took years, not months, not weeks, years.
Right.
So,
exactly.
As you mentioned your show and the work that you're doing, where can our listeners follow you to keep up with all of your sports coverage?
Yeah, so I'm largely on Twitter at Jon M. Hamm, and yes, my name is spelled exactly like the actor's name, and I had to throw the M in there because someone else had already tried to create, I think, an account for that guy at some point. So anyway, at Jon M. Hamm. And my radio work is locally in Oklahoma City at 107.7 The Franchise. Again, me and a group of people have a 2-hour show from 10 a.m. Central to noon, the Thunder Insider Show. I have some call-ins throughout the week, just doing some insider reports. And then I'm also part of the OKC Dream Team podcast. This is on patreon.com. It's me. It's Brett Dawson, who now covers the Lakers for The Athletic, but he was in Oklahoma City for a few years. My friend Andrew Schlecht, who is part of a podcast called Down to Dunk, which is also part of The Athletic. Royce Young from ESPN. So we have a podcast there. And that's largely where my stuff is at. And then, anything else that comes my way. But that's largely where you can find me.
Very cool. I'm sure that you probably get a lot of mixed ups with. Are you the Jon Hamm from Mad Men? The actor.
I have had people, because my DMs are open. I've had people that have reached out to me and very touching, I'm struggling with something like you did, and I'm like, I can't break this person's heart.
Do you go along with it as if you are?
I don't. I can't. Yeah, I just can't. So anyway, I get some interesting DMs every now and then. I get some interesting follows from people that I say, I know clearly you think this is the other guy. And, you just kind of have to roll with it and just be your own thing and then have fun with it too. I completely acknowledge that I share a name with the guy.
That's interesting. I would have never thought about that because your information is clearly on your page, your picture. So we can see who you are.
I try to put on there clearly, not the actor. And,
but you have. I guess people. Well, we live in it. Not everybody reads. Everyone just.
This is true. This is absolutely true.
Oh goodness. Well, thank you so much for joining us on the show. I'm sure that could be a whole other show in itself to get into all the stories you have around your name. But Jon M. Hamm, thank you for being a part of Beyond the Headlines with Renee Washington this week. It's been a pleasure.
Yeah, it's been a pleasure here too. Thank you so much.